Lewis Hamilton drops a shocking statement after an explosive clash with Ferrari's race engineer. Don't miss the end of the video. You won't believe what he said. The illusion of harmony has finally shattered. Lewis Hamilton, the man who for years embodied stoicism, grace under pressure, and surgical precision behind the wheel, has let the cracks show in a way that nobody could have anticipated. The world has seen him conquer adversity, defy physics, and outmaneuver legends in wet and dry conditions alike. But this was different. This wasn't a heroic charge through the field or a miraculous tire-saving masterclass. This was a human moment, unscripted, vulnerable, explosive. The seven-time world champion, revered for his calm authority and almost telepathic connection with his team, found himself no longer aligned with the very people who should be his strongest support system. And this time, it wasn't a quiet disagreement behind closed doors. It was live, audible, raw, and impossible to ignore. What unfolded during that Grand Prix was not simply a routine disagreement between driver and pit wall. It was the unraveling of a fragile relationship that had been strained, stretched, and tested repeatedly since Hamilton first put on the red suit of Ferrari. The message came during a pivotal phase of the race, with strategy in play and decisions hanging in the balance. The call came into pit, but Hamilton didn't respond with compliance. There was no copy. No understood. No trust in the tone. Instead, there was hesitation. There was resistance. "I'm not convinced," he responded, his voice sharp, stripped of patience, vibrating with disbelief. That simple phrase landed like a thunderclap, echoing far beyond the cockpit. It pierced the polished image Ferrari has tried to project and revealed something far more troubling, a disconnect not just in tactics, but in philosophy, in communication, in mutual belief. That moment wasn't isolated. It didn't exist in a vacuum. It was the culmination of months of growing discontent, a slow boiling accumulation of indecision, poor timing, missed opportunities, and half-hearted reassurances. Since joining Ferrari, Hamilton has stepped into a structure that, while rich in heritage and prestige, continues to be plagued by inconsistency and a painfully outdated internal dynamic. The team, for all its resources and legendary status, often seems like it's chasing shadows, reacting to situations instead of shaping them. And for a driver like Hamilton, whose career has been defined by proactive, data-driven precision and unbreakable synergy with his engineers, this environment has felt increasingly alien. It's not that Hamilton expected perfection. He knew this move would be a challenge. He understood that integrating into a new team, adapting to a new car philosophy, and building relationships from scratch would take time. What he didn't expect was to find himself in a place where the fundamentals of trust, coordination, and responsiveness felt so fragile. Every time he enters the garage, there's a sense of unfinished business. Every debrief seems to circle around the same unanswered questions. And every race strategy discussion feels less like a plan and more like a hopeful guess. And yet, to the casual observer, things might look acceptable. Ferrari has scored decent points. Leclerc has tasted the podium. Hamilton has delivered respectable finishes. But for those who understand the deeper layers of the sport, the metrics tell only a fraction of the story. The real problem lies beneath the results, hidden in the hesitation before every pit call, the cautious phrasing of every radio instruction, the quiet tension in the garage after each race. There's no momentum. There's no fire. There's no evidence of a long-term vision that includes Hamilton as its centerpiece. The breakdown on the radio wasn't about tire wear or pit stop timing. It was symbolic. It was about feeling unheard. About sensing that the people entrusted with maximizing your potential might not fully grasp what you bring to the table. And that feeling, for someone of Hamilton's caliber, is devastating. At Mercedes, he was never just a driver. He was an integral part of the strategic machine. His feedback was gospel. His instincts were trusted. His voice shaped decisions. At Ferrari, he too often feels like a guest in his own cockpit, consulted, but not truly empowered. The fans felt it instantly. The moment that radio message hit the airwaves, the global Formula One audience collectively leaned forward. It was the kind of moment that transcends sport, where a single sentence reveals volumes. It sparked debates, speculation, concern. Was this the beginning of the end for Hamilton's Ferrari dream? Was this partnership already showing signs of collapse? Social media lit up with divided voices, some defending Hamilton's right to question decisions, others accusing him of destabilizing the team. But everyone agreed on one point: something is fundamentally misaligned. The pressure inside Ferrari is unlike any other team. The weight of legacy, the expectations of millions of passionate tifosi, the relentless media scrutiny, it creates an environment that's as combustible as it is iconic. And Hamilton, while no stranger to pressure, is discovering that Ferrari's particular brand of chaos is something altogether different. It's not just external noise. It's internal static. Competing voices. Hierarchies that blur lines of accountability. And a reluctance to relinquish control, even when the man in the car has a track record that demands it. There's also the undercurrent of teammate dynamics. Charles Leclerc, the talented Monegasque who has been the face of Ferrari's future for years, now shares the garage with a living legend. That tension, though never publicly acknowledged, is palpable. Every intra-team comparison, every qualifying gap, every alternate strategy fuels speculation. And within that climate, Hamilton must not only race against the rest of the grid, he must constantly assert his position within a team that hasn't fully decided whether it's building around him or still clinging to its existing structure. And yet, despite the growing noise, despite the doubts creeping in from every angle, Hamilton continues to show up with dignity, with commitment, with flashes of the brilliance that has defined his career. He still finds pace where none seems available. He still provides feedback that would take others years to articulate. He still pushes a car that often resists him into positions it has no business being in. But even the strongest minds and most resilient spirits have limits. And when a champion begins to feel like their presence is being tolerated rather than embraced, the spiral becomes harder to reverse. The question now is whether Ferrari will heed the warning signs. Whether they will take this moment not as a reason to retreat into blame, but as a call to evolve. Whether they will recognize that in Lewis Hamilton, they have not just a driver, but a once-in-a-generation force who can elevate an entire organization if given the respect, autonomy, and structure he deserves. Because if they fail to respond, if they continue to treat his input as optional rather than essential, they risk losing something far more valuable than a few championship points. They risk losing the belief of the man they brought in to lead them out of the wilderness. No one can predict how the rest of the season will unfold. There may be triumphs ahead. There may be further fractures. But what's clear now is that Lewis Hamilton has reached a point where silence is no longer sustainable. His voice, once quieted by professionalism and optimism, is rising again, not in anger, but in necessity. And when a man who has conquered adversity time and time again decides to speak up, it means the situation is not just difficult, it's untenable. Ferrari wanted a legend. They got one. The question is, do they know what to do with him before it's too late? This moment we're witnessing isn't some random misstep or isolated error that can be brushed off as a racing hiccup. It's not a one-off oversight that will be forgotten by the next Grand Prix. It's the latest in a steadily growing line of alarming signs, signs that speak to something far more critical than a mistimed pit stop or a miscalculated tire strategy. It is a reflection of a much deeper dysfunction, a disconnect that's been bubbling under the surface, quietly corroding the inner workings of Ferrari's structure. It's a culmination of unspoken frustrations, misaligned intentions, and unaddressed tensions. This isn't merely about cars or corners or compound choices. It's about chemistry, leadership, trust, and the fragile psychological contract between drivers and the decision-makers who shape their destiny every race weekend. If you rewind the tape and go back race by race, you'll notice a pattern that's too glaring to ignore. Start in Montreal, a race that was ripe with opportunity. Charles Leclerc, visibly confident, mentally locked in, and clearly dialed into his machine, knew exactly what kind of strategy suited him. He wasn't making an emotional plea, he was analyzing the race as it unfolded and made a call based on data and instinct. He urged the pit wall to consider a one-stop approach. He had the tire life, the rhythm, and the clean air. But instead of collaboration, he met resistance. The team, rigid in their plan, chose not to listen. The decision backfired. His momentum evaporated. Another shot at the podium was thrown away. And what followed was not a fiery outburst or public criticism. Leclerc simply walked away with a look of quiet disillusionment, the kind of expression that says more than words ever could. A sense of emotional erosion that no debrief could fully repair. Then came Miami. Another high-stakes race. Another chance to reset the narrative. This time it was Lewis Hamilton, cool under pressure, hyper-aware of track dynamics, sensing opportunity, who tried to take control. He was gaining, he had momentum, and he believed with complete conviction that the pass was there. He asked for confirmation, for direction, for clarity. But what he got in return was nothing. Radio silence. Indecision. And in that silence, something inside began to splinter. This wasn't just tactical uncertainty. It was symptomatic of a broader problem, a lack of cohesion, a breakdown in communication, a hesitation to trust even the most seasoned judgment on the grid. For a driver who thrived for over a decade in an environment built on transparency, clarity, and mutual belief, this kind of ambiguity was more than frustrating. It was a red flag. These aren't merely tactical disagreements. These are moments that expose a structural fragility. And when those moments begin to pile up, they start to shift the energy around a team. You can feel it not just in press briefings or on the timing screens, but in the atmosphere of the garage, in the way engineers exchange glances, in how mechanics brace themselves during strategy meetings. Confidence doesn't just disappear, it decays slowly. One poor call, one moment of indecision, one misjudged priority at a time. And that's what's been happening at Ferrari all season long. From the very moment Hamilton's move to Ferrari was announced, expectations skyrocketed. The storyline wrote itself. The most decorated driver of this generation, perhaps of all time, joining the most legendary and historic team in Formula One. Fans were intoxicated by the dream, the idea of a revival, a renaissance, a fusion of greatness. But what they imagined and what reality has offered so far couldn't be more different. The potential remains massive, but what we're seeing now is not harmony, it's friction. It's not a dream unfolding, it's a masterpiece struggling to find its form. Because the issue isn't limited to points scored or races won. The real concern is the visible lack of synergy, the misalignment of philosophies, the apparent gap between the driver's instincts and the team's execution. There's no unity. No single direction. Ferrari seems torn between the future they've been building with Leclerc and the new chapter they opened with Hamilton. And instead of merging those paths into one powerful trajectory, they've allowed the coexistence to become a conflict. It's subtle, sometimes invisible to casual fans, but deeply felt by those inside and those who follow closely. One camp sees Leclerc as the long-term investment, the loyal soldier who knows the team intimately and speaks its language fluently, both literally and culturally. The other sees Hamilton as the spark of genius, the world-beating talent who could catapult Ferrari back into title contention if only he were given the environment he needs to thrive. The problem is, that environment doesn't currently exist. Hamilton didn't join a finished project. He walked into a half-written script, and it's unclear who's directing the final act. Ferrari asked for his excellence, but they didn't prepare the stage to showcase it. They invited a legend, but didn't adjust their systems to absorb what he brings. And as a result, we see moments like the one that just unfolded. Moments where even Lewis, the calm, controlled, media-savvy veteran, allows frustration to spill over. Because it's not just the isolated mistake that bothers him, it's the pattern. The repetition. The underlying feeling that he's navigating not only the corners of a circuit, but the labyrinth of an organization still figuring itself out. When a team fails to empower its drivers, when decisions are made by committee rather than conviction, when the people behind the radios hesitate to back those inside the car, something fundamental breaks. Not immediately, not obviously, but eventually, and visibly. You see it in the way drivers speak to each other, in the way they hesitate to commit to a strategy, in how they second-guess the very people they're supposed to trust with their careers. And once that seed of doubt is planted, it grows like a weed through every part of the operation. Hamilton doesn't need hand-holding. He doesn't require flattery or ceremonial praise. But what he does need, what every great driver needs, is a team that believes in him as much as he believes in them. Right now, that mutual belief is lacking. There's tension in the telemetry, doubt in the data, static in the radio calls. And all of it feeds into a growing storm that Ferrari either doesn't see or is choosing not to confront. But the paddock sees it. The fans feel it. And the competitors? They're already capitalizing on it. If this trajectory continues, the consequences won't just be limited to poor race results. Ferrari risks something far more costly, the deterioration of identity. Because it's not just about winning anymore. It's about proving they still know how to be Ferrari. That they still understand what it means to lead, to innovate, to create the kind of legacy that once made them the soul of the sport. That they can still carry legends, not just recruit them. And right now, Hamilton is a living, breathing legacy who is waiting, urgently, restlessly, silently, for the team around him to catch up to what he already knows. You don't win titles by being cautious. You win them by being courageous. Until Ferrari finds that courage, until they stop operating out of fear of failure and start executing with boldness and unity, this saga will keep unfolding, not as a triumph, but as a missed opportunity playing out in real time. And for a driver of Hamilton's caliber, that's not just frustrating. It's heartbreaking. Because he didn't come to Ferrari for nostalgia. He came for history. And unless something changes soon, history will remember this chapter not as a rise, but as a warning. The more closely one examines the situation unfolding within Ferrari's garage, the more evident it becomes that the challenges Lewis Hamilton is facing are deeply rooted, multifaceted, and interconnected. These are not simply issues of communication lapses during strategy calls or occasional disagreements over tire choices. The origin of the discomfort, the uncertainty, the underperformance, none of it is superficial. It stems from something far more fundamental, more personal, more invasive. At its core is a deeply unsettling mismatch between a driver's most intrinsic instincts and a machine that doesn't seem to speak his language. It is the breakdown of synergy, the disintegration of trust between man and machine. And for someone like Hamilton, whose driving is as much about emotional rhythm as it is about technical perfection, the disconnect is not just inconvenient, it's devastating. From the very first time Hamilton got behind the wheel of the Scarlet car, the problem was not about speed or performance relative to his teammate. It was about feel. It was about control, or the absence of it. At Mercedes, for over a decade, the braking system had become an extension of his own body. He could caress the pedal with surgical precision, knowing exactly how the car would respond. The consistency of the bite point, the feedback through the leg muscles, the way the chassis responded under heavy deceleration, it was all ingrained in his subconscious. He could brake late, brake hard, adjust his line mid-corner if needed, all without overthinking. It was instinctive. It was seamless. It was second nature. That muscle memory, built over years of partnership with a manufacturer whose technical philosophy meshed perfectly with his style, has now been turned against him. Ferrari's braking system, built with a different supplier, designed around different priorities, feels alien. It behaves unpredictably under pressure. It delivers inconsistent feedback. The modulation is uneven. The car doesn't settle the way he expects under heavy load. What once was a point of dominance is now a minefield of uncertainty. And when you remove certainty from a driver who relies on it for confidence, you don't just slow him down, you tear apart the foundation of his aggression. The brake zones, once his playground, have become places of doubt. Every corner feels like a test of faith rather than a platform for creativity. But the braking issues are just the first link in a much longer chain of complications. The overall handling characteristics of the Ferrari are diametrically opposed to Hamilton's preferences. This isn't just about setup, it's about DNA. The car's design language, its aerobalance, its suspension geometry, its torque delivery, all of it is optimized for a driver like Charles Leclerc, who prefers an aggressive front end and a rear that dances on the edge of control. Leclerc thrives in chaos. He's comfortable with a car that rotates violently, that's twitchy, that requires quick hands and fearless commitment. His brilliance is born in unpredictability. Hamilton, in contrast, operates in harmony. He is a conductor who requires every instrument in the orchestra to be in tune. He doesn't want to dominate the car through force. He wants it to flow with him, to respond to the subtlest of inputs, to reward delicacy and balance. When he leans on the rear, he expects it to support him. When he rotates into a corner, he doesn't want to fight it, he wants to glide. Ferrari's current machinery doesn't allow for that kind of connection. The rear steps out unpredictably. The balance shifts mid-corner. The tires degrade prematurely when he tries to impose his natural rhythm. Instead of dancing with the car, he's battling it. Every lap feels like a negotiation with a machine that refuses to compromise. And this struggle doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's beginning to seep into the internal culture of the team. Behind the pit wall, inside the engineering briefings, there's a slow-growing friction. It's not explosive, not yet, but it's insidious. Engineers are beginning to whisper that Hamilton needs to accelerate his adaptation curve. That his driving inputs are too conservative, too hesitant, not suited for the aggressive philosophy of the SF25. They're pointing at Leclerc's data, highlighting the time gains in sectors where Hamilton loses confidence under braking or corner entry. There's pressure to conform, pressure to change, pressure to unlearn everything that made him great. But Hamilton isn't resisting out of arrogance. He's resisting because the car is asking him to erase years of instinctual behavior and replace it with something that feels unnatural. And that cognitive dissonance, the act of forcing yourself to drive against your own intuition, is exhausting. It wears on the mind. It chips away at confidence. It introduces hesitation where there was once certainty. And in Formula One, a tenth of a second lost due to doubt is an eternity. The emotional toll is visible. It's in the slight slump of his shoulders when he walks back to the garage after a frustrating session. It's in the longer pauses during post-race interviews. It's in the flicker of disbelief when he watches replays of himself getting out-qualified. The Hamilton we're seeing now isn't a lesser version of his former self. It's a man carrying the weight of mechanical misalignment, cultural friction, and philosophical dissonance all at once. Meanwhile, at the top levels of Ferrari's hierarchy, decisions are becoming increasingly fraught. Do they shift the developmental philosophy to meet Hamilton halfway, potentially destabilizing Leclerc's comfort and performance? Or do they hold the course and expect a 7-time world champion to reinvent himself at the age of 40 to fit a car that wasn't built for him? There is no easy answer. And with every race that passes without resolution, the pressure builds, not just on track, but behind the scenes. Journalists are beginning to pick up on the subtle signs. The tone of questioning in press conferences is changing. The speculation on social media is growing louder. Fans are starting to wonder if this dream partnership is already starting to fracture beneath the surface. Every comment is analyzed. Every facial expression becomes a headline. And through it all, Hamilton is forced to navigate a political and technical labyrinth unlike anything he experienced at Mercedes. There's a quiet sense of urgency now, a feeling that something must give. Either the car evolves toward him, or he bends further toward it. But how far can a driver bend before he breaks? How much compromise can you ask from someone who spent over a decade building a style that delivered championship after championship? And yet, even in the midst of all this turbulence, Hamilton doesn't lash out. He doesn't point fingers. He absorbs. He reflects. He adjusts. Because that's who he is, not just a world-class athlete, but a consummate professional who understands the long game. Still, even the most mentally resilient individuals have their limits. And if Ferrari continues to expect transformation without offering accommodation, they may soon learn that even legends have breaking points. Hamilton didn't come to Ferrari to be a temporary headline. He didn't come for a farewell tour. He came to make history. But history isn't made by hoping things work out. It's made when organizations recognize the magnitude of the individual they've brought into their system and rise to meet him with equal belief and flexibility. If that doesn't happen, then the story of Hamilton at Ferrari may not be one of triumph, but of tragic misalignment, of what happens when brilliance is placed in a system that can't see it clearly enough to set it free. Following the conclusion of the race, after the last echoes of engine noise had faded and the adrenaline on the track had settled into the soft murmurs of post-race analysis, Lewis Hamilton emerged before the media. He wasn't animated, he wasn't enraged, but he was unmistakably resolute. No empty words. No automated affirmations to maintain appearances. His demeanor reflected calm maturity, but his message sliced through the air like a razor. We can't keep having these conversations mid-race. It was a statement delivered without theatricality, yet it landed with the weight of 1,000 accusations. The cameras captured his expression, measured but weary, composed but frustrated. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to rant. Because when Lewis Hamilton speaks with that much restraint, the message becomes even louder. This wasn't a critique of a single bad strategy call. It wasn't just frustration over a misplaced tire decision. It was an open declaration that something fundamental within the team structure is misaligned. That there's a structural breakdown undermining the very goal they all supposedly share. It was a cry for clarity, not chaos. A demand for precision, not improvisation. What Hamilton was exposing wasn't one tactical misjudgment, it was the existence of a deeper systemic problem. A lack of fluid communication. A breakdown between driver and pit wall. A confusion between real-time decision-making and pre-race planning. And it spoke volumes about Ferrari's inability to adjust under pressure, to coordinate at a championship-winning level, to translate theory into practice when the stakes are at their peak. Hamilton wasn't blaming. He was warning. Not out of ego, but out of necessity. Because he's been down this road before. He's seen how dysfunction grows quietly, like a crack in the chassis. Small at first, then catastrophic. And now he's in the middle of it again, this time wearing red. It's becoming increasingly obvious that Ferrari, for all its history, still appears fundamentally unprepared for the arrival of someone like Lewis Hamilton. Not just because of his track record, but because of what he symbolizes. He brings more than speed, he brings gravity. His arrival alters every dynamic in the team, whether the organization was ready or not. This isn't simply about adapting to a new driver. It's about adjusting to an entirely different orbit. Hamilton's presence demands introspection. It demands modernization. It requires teams to shed ego in favor of evolution. But Ferrari, for all its ceremony and grandeur, still struggles with the very notion of yielding control to an outsider, especially one whose methods, expectations, and influence extend far beyond the paddock. Internally, there are signs of cultural resistance. Reluctance to surrender old methodologies. Hesitation to reconfigure established hierarchies. A visible discomfort with being challenged, even by someone with more victories than the team has managed in the last 15 years combined. Hamilton was brought in to elevate Ferrari to a higher standard, but he's quickly finding himself trapped in a system that resists disruption. The very reason he was signed, the hope of unlocking dormant greatness, is now clashing with the pride and rigidity of an institution still haunted by its own mythology. It's a clash not of personalities, but of philosophies. Ferrari wants Hamilton's magic, but not his mirror. They want the glory without the introspection, the results without the revolution. And in this tension, something dangerous is beginning to form. A pattern. A slow-burning erosion of synergy that starts subtly, with misunderstood feedback in briefings, with mistiming in pit calls, with decisions made by committee rather than by clarity. It starts with polite smiles masking discomfort. Then it grows. Soon, there's a slight loss of faith. A hesitation in tone. A sense that what should be a united front is quietly splintering into factions. It's in the body language during debriefs, in the silences on the radio, in the lack of urgency when a call needs to be made. And Lewis Hamilton, with all his experience, can feel it. He doesn't need data to detect uncertainty. He's lived through years of high-performance environments. He knows what collaboration feels like. And he knows what it looks like when a team begins to unravel from the inside. Every race now feels heavier. Not just because of the competitive pressure, but because of the emotional weight carried into every turn. The margin for error in Formula One is razor-thin, but when the internal compass of a team is off, even the smallest hiccup can trigger spirals. Ferrari has reached a moment where their response will define not just the remainder of this season, but the credibility of their long-term vision. Will they embrace the painful but necessary transformation required to maximize Hamilton's potential? Will they learn to listen, truly listen, not just nod in meetings and applaud in press releases? Or will they continue expecting a driver who redefined an entire era to simply adjust to an outdated system? Because here's the truth that no one in red wants to say aloud. If Ferrari doesn't change fast, radically and deeply, it's not just their championship hopes that will collapse. It's their entire narrative. The story of revival. The myth of resurgence. The promise to fans worldwide that signing Hamilton was the first step in reclaiming their throne. That story is hanging by a thread. And the weight of every pit stop, every quali session, every radio call from this point forward adds tension to that thread. At some point, it will either hold or snap. There is no middle ground. The media is already catching on. Analysts are no longer praising the union of Hamilton and Ferrari as destiny. They're questioning the timeline, the leadership, the silence, the hesitation. Fans, once euphoric, are becoming anxious. Social media is already dissecting strategy errors with surgical precision. And every word Hamilton says, or doesn't say, is interpreted as a clue. His tone, his posture, even the gaps between his statements. Every nuance is now part of a broader investigation into whether this project is crumbling before it ever got going. And Ferrari, knowingly or not, is feeding that fire with every misstep. Meanwhile, Hamilton keeps showing up. Not for image. Not for headlines. But because he still believes. Or at least, he wants to believe. He's giving this everything, not just in speed, but in spirit. In patience. In mentorship. In guidance. But belief without reciprocation can't last forever. At some point, belief demands evidence. And so far, the signs are dim. He's not asking for miracles. He's not demanding perfection. He's asking for basic alignment. For operational discipline. For the kind of professional seriousness he built his career on. And if he doesn't get that, if Ferrari continues to stumble not because of external rivals, but because of their own internal disarray, then the fallout will be monumental. Not only will Ferrari fail to win, they'll lose Hamilton's trust. And once that's gone, the situation becomes irreparable. Publicly, they may continue to smile. But behind the scenes, morale will nosedive. The garage will split. The season will turn from a campaign of hope into an exercise in damage control. The optimism of winter testing will feel like a distant memory. And Hamilton, too smart, too experienced to stay shackled, will begin to detach emotionally, even if physically present. The heart of the team will beat erratically. Confidence will erode. Sponsors will ask questions. The media will circle like sharks. And by then, it won't matter how fast the car is. Right now, Ferrari isn't racing against Red Bull or Mercedes. They're racing against time. Against doubt. Against their own inability to adapt fast enough to support the driver they pursued so aggressively. Every race isn't just about championship points anymore. It's a test of culture. Of maturity. Of whether Ferrari can finally prove that its past won't always haunt its present. Because if they fail, it won't be because of a slow pit stop or the wrong compound. It'll be because they couldn't get out of their own way. And that, in a sport where milliseconds matter, would be the greatest tragedy of all. And Lewis Hamilton? He's not simply observing the situation with passive interest. He is meticulously analyzing every detail, reading between every line of every statement made by Ferrari's leadership, deciphering every subtle shift in tone during engineering briefings, every delayed response to his input, and every choice made that either includes him fully or pushes him quietly to the margins. He's not a man who lives in illusions. He recognizes when something isn't quite right, even when no one dares to speak it aloud. He's reading the room, the rhythm, the intent behind every technical decision, every word spoken in post-race analysis, every look exchanged between team principals and strategists. For Hamilton, the truth doesn't live in public declarations. It lives in the micro-moments, the quiet patterns that reveal a team's true priorities, its real belief in the man behind the wheel. And right now, Ferrari is giving him mixed signals. And Lewis Hamilton does not operate on uncertainty. This is a man whose entire career has been built not on comfort or inherited trust, but on the relentless pursuit of excellence, of total alignment between driver and machine, between talent and opportunity. He's not in Formula One to participate. He's in it to transform. And when he signed with Ferrari, he wasn't just looking for a new challenge. He was seeking a new legacy, a final mountain to climb, a final chapter to etch into history with red ink. But none of that can happen if he senses that the institution around him is hesitating, doubting, or second-guessing his role. Hamilton knows how quickly things unravel when belief turns conditional, when support becomes circumstantial. He's experienced it before. He's lived through the slow erosion of team unity, through the breakdowns that begin not with a crash on track, but with a breakdown in trust. Hamilton is watching more than just data streams and tire wear. He's watching behaviors, feeling the temperature of the garage, listening to the silences that follow certain decisions, paying attention to whether the people around him truly believe in this project, or if they're just hoping things work out on their own. He's measuring the emotional investment, the cultural shift Ferrari promised when they brought him in. Because if all he's been handed is a car without a cause, he will start recalculating. He will re-evaluate his presence. And Lewis doesn't make decisions impulsively. He makes them methodically. With brutal clarity. If he starts to feel that Ferrari isn't willing to meet him halfway, if he senses even for a moment that he's expected to carry the burden of performance alone while the institution clings to its old habits, he won't hesitate. He'll pivot. He'll redirect his energy. And that shift could be subtle or seismic. He could begin to reduce his off-track promotional involvement, pull back from developmental feedback sessions, or even reconsider how long he wants to stay tethered to a team that lacks full commitment to his vision. Hamilton may have joined Ferrari with the intention of building something historic, but he did not sacrifice his twilight years in the sport to be a ceremonial figure. He came to win. And if Ferrari can't keep pace with that ambition, he will not waste his remaining years dragging a reluctant team toward greatness. People forget, Hamilton is a survivor of the most ruthless political wars Formula One has ever seen. He's battled team orders, faced down media criticism, endured unfair penalties, and emerged stronger from every controversy thrown at him. He doesn't rattle easily. But he also knows when a fight becomes futile. He knows when the environment around him isn't evolving, when the people he depends on are still negotiating with fear instead of leading with purpose. And Ferrari, for all its beauty and mythos, is still haunted by its past, by its inability to fully trust, to fully empower, to fully adapt. Right now, Hamilton is being asked to trust a system that has historically eaten its own champions. From Prost to Schumacher to Vettel, the list is long. Hamilton understands that. He's not naive to the risks. But he also believed, when he signed on, that things would be different. That Ferrari was finally ready to change. That they were not just asking for his speed, but for his vision, his leadership, his championship DNA. So when the cracks begin to show, when the team fails to back his strategic calls or blames poor performance on driver execution rather than internal misalignment, those things don't go unnoticed. Hamilton internalizes every moment. And then he begins to plan. He doesn't speak loudly when things start to break. He doesn't storm out of meetings or call out names in the media. He moves in silence. But when he moves, the sport shifts. We've seen it before. His move from McLaren to Mercedes changed the entire balance of power in Formula One. And if he decides Ferrari isn't holding up its end of the bargain, if he feels the culture is still too rigid, too political, too reactive, he'll begin exploring his options. And don't assume he's trapped. Hamilton has more leverage than most can comprehend. He can choose whether he wants to stay and fight, or walk away and redefine the narrative entirely. This situation isn't just another teammate's spat or technical misfire. This is Formula One at its most raw and unfiltered. It's about authority, about conviction, about whether Ferrari has truly evolved into a 21st century powerhouse or whether they're still trapped in the shadow of their own mythology. And the tension between Hamilton and the institution is the most compelling, multi-layered, emotionally charged narrative we've had in years. Because this isn't just about performance. It's about identity, about legacy, about the price of greatness, and who is truly willing to pay it. You can feel it now, can't you? That sense that something is brewing. That the walls are shaking beneath the surface, even if no one wants to say it aloud. Every time Hamilton speaks with measured words, every time he skips praise after a difficult race, every time he walks back to the garage without a word, it's a signal, a warning. And the paddock is listening. Fans are noticing. Commentators are speculating. Other teams are already preparing contingency plans in case Hamilton decides he's seen enough. So where do you stand? Do you think Hamilton is right to push for more cohesion, more clarity, more commitment? Is he holding Ferrari to the standard it must reach if it wants to rise again? Or is he asking for a level of unity that the team, with its layered hierarchy and deep traditions, may simply be incapable of delivering? Drop your take in the comments. Tell us what you see when you look at this situation. Is Hamilton protecting his legacy, or trying to repair something already broken? Are Ferrari the architects of their own demise again? Or are they on the brink of transformation if they just listen and act in time? And if you're the kind of fan who doesn't just live for pole positions and podiums, but for the strategy battles, the behind-the-scenes drama, the cold stares in the paddock, the late-night team meetings that decide the future of the sport, then this is where you belong. Like this post. Subscribe if you haven't already. Share it with someone who still believes Formula One is only about racing. Let them know the real war is often fought off the track, in whispered meetings, in fractured relationships, in public smiles that hide private frustrations. Because this story? It's not even close to its climax. The pressure's building. The silence is deafening. The next chapter could explode at any moment. And when it does, you'll want to say you were watching from the very beginning.